My name is Allison Reed. I'm 36 years old, born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. I live in D.C. now, though I rarely see it by daylight. Most people don't know what I do. I don't wear a uniform with ribbons. I don't salute in public. I don't give interviews. But I do go to work every day in a building with no name on the door, behind 3 layers of security and a hallway that smells like old servers and gun oil. Some days I sit in front of glowing monitors, reading lines of intercepted code. Other days I talk to people whose names don't exist in any database and who vanish the second they hang up. No one thanks me when things go right. That's the point. When people ask what I do, I usually say, data analysis. If they keep pressing, I add something about security logistics. No one ever presses past that. I don't expect them to. I was raised in a family where silence was a second language. My father, Frank Reed, was a Marine, the kind of man who stands even when the national anthem plays on TV. He keeps his medals in a wooden box with a cracked leather handle, and I swear he still polishes them once a month. My mother, Carol, is more delicate, but even she refers to my father's military career as the golden thread that held our family together. And then there's Nick, my older brother, 2 years ahead of me in school, 5 steps ahead in everything else. Football captain, decorated officer, the kind of son people write speeches about, the kind of son our father built a shrine around. Growing up, I was near them. I don't mean neglected. I had clothes, books, a bedroom of my own. I was fed. I was told I was loved. But there's a kind of silence that wraps around you when you're not what your family recognizes as valuable. And for a long time, I didn't know how deep that silence went. Nick got his first medal at 23. I remember the ceremony. The auditorium smelled like brass and starch. My mother cried. My father saluted so sharply you could hear the snap. Me? I held his jacket while they took photos. They never asked me to be in one, and I didn't ask to be. At the time, I was already deep into my training. No one knew, not my family, not even my boyfriend Greg, who thought I was just taking night classes in cybersecurity. He used to say he liked how calm I was, that I didn't demand things, that I let him have space. He didn't understand that I didn't let him. I just had my own war going on, one I couldn't speak about. Sometimes I imagine what they'd say if they knew what I've done, what I've stopped. There was that night in Munich, the intercepted phone call at 3:42 a.m., the 2-minute window to reroute a NATO diplomat before the cafe exploded. The port in Tangier, the drone shadow. Nobody noticed but me. The pipeline sabotage in Alaska that never made the news because it never happened. But you don't put those in scrapbooks. No medals, no flag ceremonies, no speeches. Greg left last year. He said he couldn't live with a ghost, that he needed someone present. I didn't argue. What was I going to say? Sorry, I was out rerouting global threats last night. Tell me about your coworker's engagement again? I'm not bitter. Really, I'm not. There's a certain clarity in being alone. It cuts through noise. Gives you edge. Still, every now and then, I wonder what it would be like if someone just knew. Not the details, but the shape of my silence. The weight of it. I got the invitation by accident. It was a forwarded email from my mother. She didn't even write a message. Just, thought you'd want to see this. Followed by the digital flyer for Nick's next award ceremony. He was being honored at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. Distinguished Service VIP seating for family. Of course he was. I stared at the email longer than I should have. Not because I wanted to go, but because, for some reason, I hadn't been on the original recipient list. I wasn't surprised, just reminded. I didn't RSVP. I didn't text anyone. I just made a note of the date, cleared my calendar, and scheduled a personal driver under a name that isn't legally mine. When I arrived, it was raining, not dramatically. The kind of thin mist that clings to coats and makes your hair feel heavy. I wore civilian clothes, a charcoal gray wool coat, boots I could run in, hair tied back. Neutral, unassuming, invisible. There was a long line of guests already forming at the gates. Gold pins, shiny shoes, the kind of military families who arrive early just to be seen. I got in line. When I reached the checkpoint, the young officer looked at his list, frowned, and said, "Name?" "Allison Reed," I said quietly. He scanned again, squinted, and shook his head. "You're not on the guest list, ma'am. Do you have confirmation?" I didn't answer right away, just glanced past him at the courtyard, where banners flapped and marching music played from hidden speakers. I could see my mother, my father, Nick. They were laughing with another officer's family. No one was looking for me. The guard shifted, uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but—" "It's fine," I said, calmly. "No edge, no pleading. I won't hold you up." And I stepped aside, back into the mist, folding my arms and watching the people pass me by one, face after familiar face, without so much as a pause. They didn't know. But they would. Not because I planned it. Not because I needed it. Because the world has a way of recognizing what you carry, even when your hands are empty. And just then, almost exactly 2 minutes after I stepped out of line, a black car with tinted windows pulled up to the gate. The flag on the hood caught the breeze. The door opened. Out stepped General Clarence Barkley. He didn't look at the line, he looked at me. Then he smiled and said, in a voice that silenced every murmur, "Admiral Reed, welcome." There was a shift in the air, the kind you feel in your bones before you understand it. Like the moment a plane tilts just before takeoff, or the pause before someone says your name who isn't supposed to know it. The security guard straightened. His radio crackled, but he didn't touch it. People turned, first slowly, then all at once. The black car gleamed beneath the soft drizzle. The general's shoes tapped on the wet concrete as he walked, straight-backed, perfectly composed. He was older than I remembered. The last time we'd been in the same room, it was 6 years ago. Situation room. 14 a.m., Middle East briefing. He hadn't said a word to me then, just nodded as I handed him the file that would end a covert operation in 32 minutes flat. But now, he was walking toward me like I was the only person on the lawn. "Admiral Reed," he repeated, louder this time. A few cameras pivoted. "You're late." I could feel the silence behind me, the guard still holding the clipboard, the families half-turned, frozen in that liminal space between recognition and confusion. I didn't smile. I just met his eyes and said, "Traffic." He gave the faintest smirk. "Come with me." And just like that, the spell broke. The officer at the checkpoint stumbled to attention, stammering something that sounded like "ma'am," and began waving his scanner as if it would erase the last 5 minutes of awkwardness. I passed him without a glance. We walked together toward the hall, General Barkley beside me, his aides trailing behind like shadows. The path was lined with Academy cadets, some saluting, others stealing glances. A few probably wondered who I was. Most already knew. Inside, the reception area buzzed with high-ranking officers and their families. Medals gleamed like tiny suns on 100 polished chests. There were men here who had served for decades, men whose names echoed in war colleges and defense briefings. But now, many of them turned when I entered. Some nodded. One or two even stood a little straighter. My mother stood near the buffet table, holding a plastic flute of orange juice, her smile locked in place. When she saw me, it faltered for a moment. Not because she didn't recognize me, but because she didn't know why everyone else did. My father was beside her, speaking to a rear admiral I didn't recognize. He turned at her touch on his elbow and followed her gaze. He didn't speak. Not yet. But his face, the tightness in his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes, told me he was rewriting a narrative in real time. Then I saw Nick. He stood at the far end of the room, half in conversation, half apart, like he always was at these things. He wore his dress blues like he was born in them, his ribbons a cascade of bright color across his chest. Someone was laughing at something he'd just said. Then that someone followed his line of sight and stopped smiling. Nick's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. Not surprise, not even anger, just a question he didn't yet know how to ask. The ceremony began shortly after. The hall was a grand one, arched ceilings, flags suspended like motionless wind. Rows of chairs filled quickly. I sat near the front, at the general's left, a place reserved for senior command. Across the aisle, my family was seated, still processing. My mother kept glancing over. My father stared straight ahead. Nick. Nick didn't look at me at all. The speaker at the podium was a younger admiral with the kind of voice designed for statements of national pride. He introduced honorees with precision, reading from a script so smooth it might have been carved in stone. Nick was called first, his record impeccable, his service exemplary. He walked to the stage under a swell of applause. Then came the moment no one had been told to expect. The speaker cleared his throat, a subtle gesture, then he looked down at the next page and paused. For outstanding service in the field of naval intelligence and for actions that directly prevented loss of life aboard the USS Mackenzie during the classified operation referred to only as Event Echo, we are honored to present the Legion of Merit to Admiral Reed. There was a beat of stillness, half a second, long enough for the collective breath of the room to hold, and then they stood. Not everyone, not all at once, but enough. The Secretary of the Navy rose first, then 3 captains in the second row, a cluster of junior officers followed, and then, row by row, they came to their feet. I walked to the stage, boots soundless against the carpet, and accepted the medal without expression. No speech. No hand over my heart. Just a nod. When I turned, I looked. Not at the cameras, not at the admirals, not even at the crowd still rising. I looked at my brother. He was sitting. Everyone around him had stood. But he sat rigidly, staring at me with something that was not disbelief. It was recognition, and in his eyes, I saw it. The memory of a moment, months ago, when an encrypted alert had rerouted his entire ship due to inconclusive intel. He had mocked it afterward, called it bureaucratic noise, a waste of resources. He had no idea it had saved them all. Until now. Afterward, there were handshakes, words I barely registered, flashes from photographers, journalists I would never speak to. I slipped away before the crowd fully thinned. I found him alone, standing under an overhang outside the main hall, watching the rain start up again in a quiet curtain. He didn't turn when I approached. "You let me make fun of you," he said finally. His voice was low, controlled. "You let me talk about my deployments like you weren't even part of the war." I said nothing. He turned to me. "Why?" There were so many things I could have said. About the secrecy, the oaths, the classified nature of everything I lived inside, about our father, and the house built on metals and myths, about what silence costs when you wear it too long. But instead I said, "I didn't stay quiet for you. I stayed quiet for the mission. You just weren't ready to hear it." He stared at me for a long time, then he nodded, just once, not approval, not apology, just acknowledgement. It was enough. At least, for now. The house looked the same. After everything, after the ceremonies, the standing ovation, the shift in the air that now followed me wherever I went, it still looked exactly as I remembered. Two-story, brick front, pale shutters, a flagpole out front. My father had always kept the lawn like a parade ground, trimmed with military precision. He used to say, "You could tell a man's discipline by how straight his hedges were." I arrived after dark, in a rented car. I hadn't told them I was coming. I wasn't sure I would until I turned onto the old street. The porch light was on. That surprised me. My mother never left lights on unnecessarily. I knocked. Once. The door opened before I could knock again. My mother didn't speak. She just looked at me for a long second, taking in the coat, the hair still pulled back from the ceremony, the unreadable expression I'd worn for decades, and then she stepped aside. Inside, the house was warm. Too warm. The kind of heat that clings to curtains and rugs and tries to pretend the world outside doesn't exist. The television was on in the living room, muted. A familiar photo of Nick with some senator sat on the mantel, next to my father's medals in their glass frame. And next to those. I froze. It was mine. The medal from the ceremony. The one I hadn't taken with me afterward. The one I hadn't even looked at properly. It was there. Centered. Polished. Reflected in the soft glow of the lamp. My father was sitting in his old chair. He didn't rise when I walked in. He didn't greet me. Just gestured with one hand to the seat across from him, like I was a visiting officer. So I sat. The silence stretched, tight as a wire. Then, without looking at me, he said, "How long?" I knew what he meant. I answered quietly, 13 years. He nodded, not surprised, just absorbing it. "You ever lie?" he asked next. I raised an eyebrow. He glanced at me. "In your work? You ever have to lie to people?" "Every day," I said. Another nod, and then, almost too quietly to hear, "Did you ever lie to us?" I considered that carefully. "No," I said. "I never told you anything false." "But you didn't tell us the truth either." "I couldn't." He looked away. A long pause. My mother brought in tea, as if this were any other evening, as if we were discussing weather or football, or who was hosting Thanksgiving this year. She poured it into mismatched mugs and placed mine on a coaster shaped like an eagle. Her eyes avoided mine, but her hands trembled just slightly. "You were in Tangier last year," she said suddenly. I looked at her, startled. She didn't wait for a response. "You said you were in New York for a tech summit. But your shoes, they were covered in dust. Not city dust. Sand, desert sand. I hadn't noticed." "I remember," she continued, her voice small. "You stood by the sink. Said nothing, and I thought, she's been somewhere far." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. Across from me, my father picked up his mug, stared into it like it might explain something he couldn't. Then he said, "Your grandfather served in Korea. He never talked about it. He used to go out back, after dinner, and sit with his back to the house. Never told us what he saw, what he did. I used to think he was ashamed." He looked up. Now I wonder if he was just tired of explaining things no one wanted to understand. I met his eyes. There was no apology in them. But there was something else. Something rarer. Recognition. Not of rank. Not of medals. Of cost. That night he brought out the wooden box. I hadn't seen it in years. It used to sit in the hallway closet, under a stack of army manuals and brittle newspapers. Inside were his medals, his father's medals, photos in sepia tones of men standing stiffly in rows, expressions lost to history, and now, mine, nestled among them like it had always been there. He didn't say a word, just closed the lid and pushed it toward me. I didn't touch it. The box wasn't a gift. It was a ledger, a quiet accounting of sacrifice. That night, I slept in my old room. It hadn't changed. The same posters on the wall, the same bookshelf filled with old thrillers and science magazines, but it felt like a place I had only dreamed of. In the morning, I left before sunrise. I didn't say goodbye, neither did they. Some things are better left suspended in that still, honest moment between people who are trying to rebuild something that never really had a foundation. The next few months moved quickly. Meetings, briefings, reassignments. I found myself speaking more in rooms I used to observe in silence. People who once referred to intelligence like a side dish now paused to ask questions. Real ones, not about code, about judgment, timing, precision. Even Nick called, once. He didn't say much, just, "They're moving me to the Pacific Fleet, new protocols. Apparently, we're all supposed to listen to people like you now." I smiled, even if he couldn't hear it. "You'll survive," I said. Then, before he could hang up, I added, "And Nick?" "Yeah? Don't wait too long to start listening." He didn't laugh, but he didn't argue either. That was the beginning of something. Small, but real. One evening, after a closed-door conference at Langley, someone asked me, "What changed for you? What made them finally see you?" I thought about it. I thought about the checkpoint, the rain, the look on Nick's face when he stayed seated. Then I said, "Nothing changed. I didn't become someone else. I just stopped asking permission to be who I already was." They didn't understand, not fully, but they nodded, and that was enough. The hotel suite was quiet. Far below, the city pulsed in soft motion, car lights winding through arteries of asphalt, blinking red and white like distant signals from another life. It was late, or early, depending on how you measured time. In this world, clocks mattered less than consequences. I stood at the window, barefoot, holding a glass of water I hadn't touched. My uniform was still folded on the armchair, clean, crisp, unworn since the morning. These days I wore it less and less. There were no papers on the desk, no laptop glowing, no dossiers awaiting my signature, just stillness. I'd been home for 72 hours, or what passed for home these days, a penthouse overlooking Washington, D.C., paid for by a budget that didn't officially exist, furnished by people who called everything secure and nothing personal. Behind me, a television murmured quietly, forgotten. On the screen, a round table of retired analysts dissecting reforms in military intelligence. My name came up twice. They pronounced it like it belonged to someone they'd read about, not someone who had stood in that chair, made those decisions, signed those authorizations. I turned it off. There's a strange moment, after years of being unseen, when you finally step into the light and realize the light isn't warm, it's fluorescent. Political. It documents you, but it doesn't know you, and it never stays. I used to think recognition was the point. That one day, if I just worked hard enough, precisely enough, invisibly enough, someone would notice. Someone would finally say, "We see you. We understand what you've given." But the truth is simpler. They never really understand. And it doesn't matter. Because you don't do this kind of work for applause. You do it because you're wired differently. Because while other people hear noise, you notice the pattern. While others talk, you listen. You measure silences. You track absence. You follow threads no one else can see. And if you're lucky, or cursed, you find meaning in that. I didn't become an admiral to be saluted. I became one because the work needed to be done. Because there were threats that didn't wear uniforms. Because there are lives you save that will never know they were in danger. A knock broke the silence, not urgent, just polite. I opened the door. It was my mother. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker, just quieter. Like someone who'd stopped filling rooms and started observing them instead. She held a folder. No envelope. Just a plain manila folder, worn at the edges. Inside were newspaper clippings, printed articles, a photo of me shaking hands with a diplomat I barely remembered, a quote from the Secretary of Defense, a transcript from the Senate floor, my name highlighted in yellow. "I've been collecting them," she said softly, "since the ceremony." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I could. She didn't step in, didn't ask to sit. She just looked at me, eyes too full for words, and said, "Your father still keeps the box open." And then she was gone. No dramatic goodbye, no apology, no speech about being proud. Just a gesture. Simple. Human. The next morning, I arrived at the West Wing through the side entrance. I didn't wear my uniform, just a dark suit, clean lines, flat shoes. I carried no bag, no folder, no statement. The security agents knew me by name now. They used to glance at credentials. Now they nodded without looking. Inside, the room was already filling, a defense summit, classified, off record, the kind of meeting that never makes the news but shapes the next 10 years of global policy. Someone was speaking when I entered. I didn't interrupt. I took my seat near the far end of the table, between two chairs that used to sit empty when people weren't sure whether I belonged. Now they waited. A young aide whispered as he passed behind me. "They'll be deferring to you on this section. You're leading the intel thread." I nodded. The screen blinked. The lights dimmed. Files opened, and we began. No introduction. No reminder of titles. Just trust. Quiet, steady trust. Later that night, after everything, after the decisions and briefings and coded reports, I walked alone down a long hallway, one I'd memorized years ago. At the end was a glass door leading to a balcony. Outside, the city stretched below like a map of living memory. I leaned on the railing. The air was cool. Not sharp, not heavy. Just enough to remind me I was real. Behind me, power moved like a machine. Meetings, calls, wheels turning. But out here, in the open, there was only breath. There were no names to list, no orders to give. Only one truth. Soft and unwavering. I wasn't proving anything anymore. I wasn't waiting for permission. I wasn't trying to be seen. I was. And that was enough. The wind lifted my hair. Somewhere below, unseen, traffic passed like a current of ghosts, and for the first time in years, maybe the first time ever, I closed my eyes and let it all be quiet. You know, life doesn't always reward the loudest voices. Sometimes, it honors those who endure in silence, who do what's right when no one's watching, who stay human in a world that often forgets what that means. I've learned that recognition isn't everything, but dignity, real, quiet dignity, is something you carry with you, even when it feels like no one sees, especially then. And if you're going through something right now, if the world feels unfair or no one understands you, just remember, you don't need permission to be who you are. Keep going. Stay kind. Stay sharp. Stay human. If this story moved you, even just a little, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories coming. Stories of ordinary people who faced betrayal, silence, loss, and still stood tall. Leave a comment down below. Tell us what you felt, or just let someone out there know they're not alone. Thank you for watching. And remember, the strongest people often move in silence, but their stories deserve to be heard.